Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
The call came just after noon on a Tuesday, while I was sitting at my kitchen counter with my laptop open and half a cup of cold coffee I'd microwaved twice already. I didn't even look at the caller ID. Only two people ever called me directly anymore, my mother and the bank, when my brother's tuition bills needed verifying. So I picked up, expecting the usual, some question about a gluten-free pie or a reminder about flight times. What I got instead felt like a slap that had been rehearsed. "Emma," my mother said, voice too cheery to be real, "we've decided to make Thanksgiving a little more curated this year." I stared at the screen like it would decode her tone for me. Curated? Yes, darling. You know, just close family and, well, people who are doing really well right now. We thought it might be better for the energy if we kept things positive. There it was. The punchline. The polished knife wrapped in holiday cheer. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the fridge, where a photo of my nephews, both of whom I'd been helping put through that ridiculously expensive prep school, was magnet pinned above my gas bill. So, I said, as evenly as I could, "I'm not invited because I'm not successful enough." "Oh, don't put it like that," she laughed, the way people laugh when they want to cover a wound they've just opened. "It's not about you personally. It's just, we're trying to create a certain atmosphere. Brent's firm just went public and your father wants to make a toast without any tension." There it was again. Brent. My older brother. The family's walking LinkedIn profile. Married with 2 kids, golf on Sundays. The kind of man who says things like, "let's circle back," and genuinely means it. The man whose mortgage I helped pay the year he overextended on a new house. The man whose kids' private school tuition auto-drafted from my account for the last 3 years. But sure, I wasn't a good match for the atmosphere. "What about the boys?" I asked. "I thought they liked seeing me." "They'll be fine," she said quickly, already moving to end the call. "We just thought this year would be different. We're even asking Aunt Pam to sit it out. She hasn't really bounced back from that leg surgery, and it's all just a bit much." Aunt Pam? The woman I'd taken care of for 6 months after her fall, while everyone else sent flowers and excuses. Of course. I could practically hear the champagne chilling. I ended the call before I could say something I'd regret. Not because I didn't have words, God, I had words, but because I knew none of them would land. My mother had decided that success meant stocks and suits and a wife with the right bone structure. My little handmade online store, the thing I built from my studio apartment at 28 with 0 loans and a busted laptop, didn't count. Never mind the fact that I paid my bills on time, gave to charity, and had enough put away that I didn't need to grovel for favors. That kind of quiet success? It wasn't sexy enough for their kind of curated holiday. I sat in silence for a long time after that. I didn't cry. That would have felt too much like surrender. I just thought about the years I'd twisted myself into knots to stay on their radar. The birthdays I never missed. The Venmos I never asked to be repaid. The polite nods I gave when Brent's wife called my business cute. It wasn't that I was angry. Not yet. Anger would have been easy, even comforting. What I felt was something colder, something closer to clarity. Like stepping outside after a storm and realizing the flood took everything you thought was nailed down. My phone buzzed again. A text this time, from my mother. A smiley face and a turkey emoji, followed by, "Hope you find something cozy to do." I deleted it without replying. Outside, the sky was that washout gray that always made the trees look lonelier. I watched the wind pull leaves off the branches like it was personal. Maybe it was. I looked back at my laptop. Orders were steady, not booming, but enough. Enough to get by. Enough to keep Brent's kids in that school with the Latin motto and the dumb fencing team. I opened my banking app. Tuition was due in 4 days. The number blinked up at me, cheerful as ever. And that's when something inside me shifted. Not a snap. Not an explosion. Just a click. Like a puzzle piece sliding into place after sitting on the table too long. I smiled. Not bitterly. Not even with satisfaction. Just Quietly. Fine. They wanted a curated Thanksgiving? They could have it. They wanted successful people only? Then they could fund their own damn illusions. I wasn't going to fight. I'd been fighting for approval since I was 17, and what had it gotten me? A pat on the head and a seat at the kids' table next to a bowl of cold green beans. No, I wasn't going to argue. But I sure as hell wasn't going to forget. 3 days after the call from my mother, I woke up to a clear sky, made myself a strong coffee, and stared at the cursor blinking on my banking app screen like it had something to say. I had the tuition payment sitting in the scheduled transactions list, right where it always was, set to draft automatically on the 15th, like it had for the past 3 years, without fail. No one ever thanked me for it anymore. Not that they really did in the beginning, but the silence had taken on a tone lately, like it was expected. Like I was just the money tree that bloomed right on time. I hovered over the cancel recurring payment option for maybe 10 seconds. No dramatic music. No shaking hands. I just clicked it. The screen refreshed. The transaction vanished. I didn't tell anyone. Not Brent, not the school, not my parents. I figured someone would notice when the comfort they relied on dried up like water turned off in the middle of a shower. It took 4 days. The first missed call from Brent came early in the morning, before I'd even gotten out of bed. I let it go to voicemail. The second came while I was brushing my teeth, and the third while I was trying to photograph some new inventory for my store. By call number 6, I muted my phone and left it in the other room. I didn't owe him a reaction. I owed myself the peace he never gave me when I needed a single ounce of understanding. That afternoon, he sent a text. Hey, pretty sure there's been a mix-up with the boys' tuition. You still doing the transfer, or did the bank mess up again? Let me know. Need it sorted ASAP. I stared at the screen, reread it twice, then set the phone face down. A mix-up. That was rich. Like I was some absent-minded assistant who forgot to order toner. Not the person who had fronted over $75,000 a month, every year, for those kids to learn fencing and ancient Greek and God knows what else in that snobby little school with the Latin motto nobody could translate. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. $75,000 a month times 12 months is $900,000 a year, which sounds crazy, right? Except that's what I've paid. Or maybe not. Maybe it was closer to $25,000 a month. Math isn't my strong suit when I'm pissed off. Point is, it wasn't pocket change. It was money I could have used to scale my business, to buy a real office space, or even just take a damn vacation that didn't involve staying at a roadside motel with questionable carpets. Brent kept calling. By day 2, it was 10 missed calls. By day 3, 20. At one point, I saw his number pop up while I was at the grocery store, and I laughed out loud in the middle of the frozen peas. A woman next to me turned her head. I didn't explain. There's something strange about watching someone unravel slowly, especially when they've built their life on borrowed bricks and assumed you'd always hold up the scaffolding. Brent wasn't angry at first, just confused. Then annoyed. Then, very quickly scared. By the 5th day, the tone of his texts changed. Less friendly, more frantic. Emma, I don't know what's going on, but the school called. They said payment didn't go through and they need confirmation or the boys can't return after break. Then came the guilt trip. You can't do this to them. They love it there. You know that. Please call me back. And when guilt didn't work, the threats came next. If those kids get kicked out, it's on you. I read that one 4 times. Each word heavier than the last. My brother, the golden boy, the pride of our family, the one with the framed MBA and the wife who wore pearls to brunch, had finally said the quiet part out loud, that everything would always be my responsibility, whether I agreed to it or not. I opened the messaging app, typed out a response. How about you sell that boat Dad co-signed on or cancel one of the ski trips instead of calling me 20 times a day like I'm your personal ATM? Then I deleted it. I didn't want to fight with him. That's the part that gets misunderstood in stories like this. People think revenge has to be loud and angry, full of screaming matches and slammed doors. But the most satisfying kind is silent, sharp, and clean. Like a paper cut you don't feel until it starts bleeding. I stood at the window that evening and watched the sunset go from orange to violet, thinking about how quiet everything had gotten. No invitations. No thank yous. No more pretending I didn't see the way they rolled their eyes when I talked about my work or how Brent never mentioned me when he bragged about the kids. It wasn't about money. Not really. It was about being seen. And if they weren't going to see me when I gave everything, then they were damn well going to feel me when I stopped. My phone buzzed again. A long message from Brent, full of heat and desperation. This is serious, Emma. They're putting our family name on the line. Fix it before it gets worse. I started to type again. Paused. Then I closed the app and let the screen go dark. There was a time, not so long ago, when I still believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I kept my head down and did the right thing, eventually my family would come around and see me, not just glance in my direction, but really see me for who I was and what I had survived. I was 23 the first time I disappointed them officially, the moment branded into family lore as the Emma Business School meltdown, though no one ever bothered to ask why it happened or what it cost me to make that decision. The truth was simpler than they wanted it to be. Aunt Denise, my mother's older sister, the only person in the family who remembered my birthday without a calendar, had a stroke and landed in a rehab center 3 hours outside the city. She had no children, no husband, and apparently no one else willing to drive out there and wipe her chin when she tried to eat applesauce. I dropped out of my MBA program mid-semester and took a part-time job at a bookstore so I could be there every other day to sit by her bed and read to her out loud until she fell asleep. I never once heard Brent mention her name. When I told my father what I was doing, thinking maybe he'd respect the sacrifice, his eyes went glassy with that particular kind of disappointment only men like him could conjure, cold, clipped, and just patronizing enough to hurt without outright yelling. You were supposed to lead, not babysit a dying woman, he said, like I'd flushed my future down a drain just because I wasn't dressed in a pantsuit shaking hands at a career fair. You're better than this, Emma, he added, though it didn't sound like he believed it for even a second. Then he muttered something that stuck with me longer than it should have. You've always been a distraction. That word, distraction, clung to me like smoke for years. Not failure, not disappointment, not screw up. Distraction. Like I was an interruption in the family's regularly scheduled programming of upward mobility and polite bragging at charity events. Meanwhile, Brent, who had just crashed a leased BMW into a mailbox while half-drunk, was being groomed to take over some VP role at a logistics firm our dad invested in. He didn't finish top of his class. He didn't hustle for that job. He didn't even like it, if I'm being honest. But he fit the mold. He showed up in the right suits and shook the right hands, and that was all anyone ever asked of him. While he got introduced at galas and asked to speak on panels, I was working 60-hour weeks at flea markets, online shops, and local fairs, testing different product lines, burning through fabric samples, hand-packing every box that left my tiny apartment. I didn't have investors or connections or startup capital. Just stubbornness and caffeine, and the kind of work ethic people pretend to admire until it comes without a brand name attached. But none of that counted in our family. At Thanksgiving dinners, Brent's wife would talk about their trip to Portugal like she was describing the moon landing, and my father would nod along as if any of it mattered, as if the real status symbol was in the mileage, not the meaning. When I talked about my online shop hitting 5 figures for the first time, my mother blinked like I'd spoken a foreign language and asked if I'd considered going back to school, just in case this little thing doesn't work out. Little thing. That's what they called the business that paid their grandson's tuition and bought the wine they drank on my dime. And then, this week, I found something that made my chest go hollow. I wasn't snooping, not exactly. Brent had forwarded me an email chain from the school finance office by mistake. The kind of mistake people make when they assume you're still playing the role of the silent benefactor. Buried in one of the earlier messages, from his wife to him, was a comment that stopped me cold. So we're using the remaining tuition money toward the beach house, right? Just like that. Not a question. Not a request. A statement. An assumption. The kind of entitlement that made it clear they'd never thought of the money as mine in the first place. Just another pool they could dip their hands into when their lifestyle started to outrun their actual income. I sat there reading that line over and over long after the screen dimmed. I had to tap it to wake the phone again, just to check I hadn't imagined it. But no, it was there, as real as every text Brent had sent begging me to reinstate the payments before the school created a scene. They used my money to buy a beach house, a second home, a vacation retreat. And they still had the nerve to call me unsuccessful. It hit me then, with a kind of quiet fury I couldn't name right away, that maybe the only reason they kept me around all these years was because I never made them pay the actual price for their arrogance. I funded their illusion while they mocked my reality. Not anymore. Back when I was 23, I still thought the world was something you could negotiate with, that if you worked hard enough and explained yourself clearly, people, especially family, would eventually understand you, or at the very least, they'd stop treating you like a burden with lipstick and ambition. I was in my second year of business school, halfway through a strategic development class taught by a man who called women sweetheart in front of the entire lecture hall, when Aunt Denise had her stroke. It was sudden and ugly and quiet all at once, the kind of event that starts with a half-slurred phone call and ends with hospital sheets that smell like bleach and grief. She was the only one in our family who remembered that I liked lemon in my tea and that I used to cry if my shoelaces didn't match. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not because we had a falling out, but because life does that thing where it keeps you running forward even while someone you love is silently falling apart in the background. My mom said, "She'll be fine, just a minor stroke," and then proceeded to book a wine tour in Napa. Brent didn't respond at all. My father called once and said he'd sent a card. That was the whole show of concern from our side of the family. So I dropped out. I packed up my textbooks, called the registrar, and signed the paperwork to leave my program. Temporarily, I told myself at the time, but some part of me already knew that wasn't true. I moved into Aunt Denise's apartment, a modest one-bedroom near the edge of the city, and spent 3 months spoon-feeding her mashed potatoes and reading Danielle Steele novels aloud until she could move her mouth well enough to say, "This one's crap." Put on Wheel of Fortune. I learned how to change bedpans without gagging, how to massage atrophied muscles with frozen spoons, and how much pain could be hidden behind eyes that didn't blink as often anymore. When I finally came home for Thanksgiving that year, I expected at least a nod of acknowledgement from my father, some brief flicker of recognition that I had done something hard and selfless, something that mattered beyond grades and polished resumes. What I got instead was a glass of wine pushed into my hand and a single sentence that I still hear sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep. "You've always been a distraction, Emma." He said it like he was offering a compliment wrapped in resignation, like I was a story he had started reading and then abandoned halfway through because it didn't have enough business plans or stock options. I stood there, holding the wine, pretending I hadn't heard him, because if I let it land, it would have broken something inside me I wasn't ready to fix. Meanwhile, Brent was being toasted. Literally toasted. Champagne glasses raised in his honor because he had just landed some executive title at a logistics firm, an opportunity, of course, made possible by a call from our father to a fraternity brother. Brent didn't even know what the company did for the first 6 weeks. He once asked me what supply chain dynamics meant, and I told him to Google it. He laughed and said, "That's your thing, Emma. The nerdy stuff." I went home that night and started sketching ideas for a handmade planner. Just paper and grit and a feeling in my gut that I had to make something of my own or I'd end up as someone's cautionary tale. That little sketch turned into a product, which turned into a series, which turned into a brand, and eventually an online store. It was slow at first, 10 orders a week, then 20. I worked out of my kitchen, ate ramen 3 nights a week, and slept with my phone under my pillow in case a customer needed a last-minute shipping adjustment. No investors. No shortcuts. No family loans. Just me, my hands, and the stubborn belief that I didn't need their blessing to be worthy of one. Still, they treated it like a hobby. Even after I hit 6 figures in sales, even after a local paper ran a piece calling me a one-woman productivity empire, my father just smiled politely and asked if I'd considered getting back into real work. Brent's wife once told me my packaging was adorable in the same tone you used to talk about puppies at the shelter. Everyone clapped when Brent gave a speech at a family reunion about scaling success, but no one mentioned that I paid for the event venue and the caterer, quietly, without fanfare, because I thought maybe that's what love looked like. But that love wasn't mutual. It was transactional. And this week, the transaction line finally got crossed. I found out by accident, in the most insulting way. Brent had forwarded me a thread from the school's finance office, asking me to help sort out a tuition issue. In the scroll of replies, buried between notes about re-enrollment forms and uniform requirements, there it was clear as sunlight on a windowpane. "So we're using the leftover tuition funds for the beach house down payment, right?" wrote his wife. No question mark. No discussion. Just assumption. It knocked the wind out of me, not because of the amount, but because of the entitlement. They took the money I gave their kids, money I earned while hand-cutting paper and packaging orders at 2 in the morning, and used it to secure a second home, a place where they could drink wine on a deck and pretend they built their empire with their own damn hands. I never agreed to that. I was never even asked. It started with a ping, one of those casual desktop notifications that slides in from the corner of your screen like it has no idea it's about to change everything. I had just finished packing up an order for a returning customer, someone who always requested the same hand-drawn thank you note I'd been doing since my early Etsy days, when I saw the subject line float in, Thanksgiving seating and talking points. It looked like junk at first, maybe a newsletter or one of those overly polished chain letter type group messages sent by people who don't know how CC and BCC work. But then I saw the sender's name, Brent. And below his, I saw my parents. All CC'd, casually, like this was the family logistics board and I'd been given a seat, accidentally, unknowingly, and completely uninvited. The first line hit me like a slap, not because of what it said, but because of how normal it sounded, like this was just another Tuesday in their world of curated dinners and image management. "Just confirming we've moved Emma off the list," Brent wrote. "Didn't want to deal with her vibe this year." Her vibe? Like I was a fashion trend that expired in the 90s. The message continued, going into petty detail about who would sit where, which wines were approved for the table, and a reminder from my mother not to include anything artisan or handmade looking on the centerpiece, because we don't want to repeat the year of the burlap napkins. Those napkins were mine. I made them with my own hands the year she asked me to bring something rustic. She laughed at them in front of everyone and swapped them out before dessert. I remembered standing in the guest bathroom, hands gripping the porcelain sink, telling myself I wouldn't cry until I got to the car. I kept reading, not because I wanted to but because some part of me still hoped there'd be a turn, an apology, a defense, some stray sentence from my dad saying, "Come on, she's still family." But that line never came. Instead, there was a paragraph from my mother, and I read it 3 times just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. "I just don't want her around the kids," she wrote. "It's confusing for them. She's unmarried, still struggling emotionally, and that little online store makes her think she's made it. We want winners around the boys. Role models. Winners." That word again, the one they threw around like confetti when Brent got a new job or his wife updated their kitchen with gold cabinet pulls. I sat perfectly still, the only movement in the room coming from the cursor blinking at the end of the email, like it was waiting for me to type something, anything, to push back, to scream, to defend my worth. But I didn't type a damn thing. I didn't move. The humiliation came not from surprise, but from confirmation. For years, I suspected this was how they talked when I wasn't in the room. The dismissive glances. The eye rolls when I said I couldn't make it to a ski trip because of order deadlines. The silence when I said I was happy being single. It wasn't about my choices, it was about how those choices didn't fit their script. What made it unbearable was the ease. The way they wrote about me as if I couldn't read, couldn't hear, couldn't bleed. Brent chimed in next with a quick joke. At least she won't hand out those weird planner things again, God. Remember the one with the stickers? Then he added a laughing emoji. I could almost hear his voice in my head, that casual, rehearsed cruelty disguised as banter, the kind of tone he used at family barbecues when he recapped my little business to his friends like it was a phase I'd grow out of. Then came the final blow. Another message from my mother, just one line. Seat goes to Alan, he's actually building something. Alan was Brent's business partner. I'd met him once, briefly, in passing, when I dropped off a package for my nephews last summer. He shook my hand like I was a secretary and called me the creative one, which I suppose was meant as a compliment. And now he had my chair. My literal chair. The one that used to sit between Aunt Pam and the fireplace. The one that used to have my name scrawled on a place card in gold ink, even if it was a little crooked because my mother rushed the setup and never liked to redo things. I stared at that email chain for what must have been 20 straight minutes before I finally closed the laptop and stood up, but the room didn't feel like my apartment anymore. It felt like a museum of bad decisions, and I was the featured exhibit. That evening, just after 6, my phone buzzed with a photo. No caption. Just the image. The family, all dressed in coordinated white and beige, clustered around the long dining table I hadn't seen in over a year. My father at the head, Brent standing behind him like some proud heir, his wife with her flawless smile, and my nephews in matching ties. The table was dressed in all white linens, gold chargers, 3 bottles of wine, and not a single handmade anything in sight. I scanned the seats. Every place setting accounted for. Except mine. In the spot where I used to sit, right between Brent and the fireplace, there was a new name card. One that read Alan. I closed the message and turned off my phone. It was just after 8 in the morning when the first call came, my phone lighting up with Brent's name across the screen, vibrating so hard against the kitchen counter that it nearly knocked over the coffee mug I hadn't touched yet. I let it ring, of course. I'd let him call a lot lately, and he'd been calling more and more frequently, as if volume could change the silence I'd been giving him. I thought maybe this one would end like all the others, with a long voicemail filled with thinly veiled panic and desperate pleasantries, but it didn't. This time, after the ringing stopped, he called again. And again. 3 times in a row. By the 4th, I finally picked up, not because I wanted to talk to him, but because I needed to hear the sound of his unraveling. I needed to hear what it sounded like when the golden child cracked. He didn't say hello. There was no preamble, no posturing. The moment I said his name, Brent's voice came through the line thick with something I'd never heard from him before. Not irritation, not arrogance, not even anger. It was fear. Real fear. The kind of fear that seeps into a man who built his identity on a house of cards and just felt the table shake. They're gone, he said, his voice rasping like he'd either been drinking or crying or both. The school kicked them out this morning. Full expulsion. The headmaster said the missed payments were one thing, but apparently someone forwarded that email chain to a donor, and now they're saying the family's reputation could damage enrollment optics. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I wasn't about to perform sympathy for the man who siphoned money from my bank account like it was his personal trust fund, and then mocked me behind my back for not living up to my potential. Let him feel the burn of consequences for once. Let him taste the ash of lost privilege. He deserved at least that much. She left me, he continued, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. Caroline. She took the boys and went to her sister's place. She said I ruined everything. She said I used them. She found the beach house documents. You were right. I shouldn't have touched the money. I let the silence stretch long and flat between us. Then I exhaled through my nose, slow and deliberate. You don't understand what you've done, he said, suddenly sharper, like the panic had turned inward and found a place to sharpen itself against. Dad says you humiliated us. He said you nuked everything we built. I closed my eyes, leaned back in my chair, and let that sentence wash over me like lukewarm bathwater someone else had already soaked in. I'd heard so many variations of it over the years, phrases like, "We're just worried about optics," "You're not thinking long-term," or "You'll thank us when you're older." But this one was different. This time, it was soaked in resentment, not control. This time, I wasn't the child being lectured. I was the match that had already been struck. "I know exactly what I've done," I said, my voice so calm it felt like it belonged to someone else. I finally acted like a winner. He went silent. Not the kind of silence that begs for pity, but the kind that has nothing left to say because the truth just closed the door in its face. After he hung up, I left the phone on the table and walked into the living room, where the morning sun was just starting to crawl across the hardwood floors in long, clean lines. It was quiet in a way I'd learned to love, no children yelling, no husbands muttering, no tension riding on my shoulders like an invisible cloak. Just peace. Earned peace. Built peace. The next day, my father called. I didn't answer at first, not out of spite, but because I was curious how long he'd hold out. 5 rings. 6. I finally picked up on the 7th. "Emma," he said, with that same clipped tone he always used when he was pretending to be casual. I wanted to talk. I leaned against the kitchen counter and waited. I'd learned that with him. Waiting was a weapon. "You made a point," he said after a long pause. A loud one. More silence. I could hear him shifting in his leather chair. Probably in his home office, the one lined with fake degrees and dusty trophies. "But I'll admit something," he continued. "You surprised me. You showed teeth. That's rare." I didn't respond. He went on anyway. "Next year," he said, "I want you at the table." There was no apology. No ownership. Just an offer delivered like a job promotion, conditional, convenient, carefully calculated to serve his own interests. A seat at the table. The same table they had denied me, mocked me over, erased me from. And now I was being invited back not out of love, not out of regret, but because I had made myself too dangerous to ignore. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. That night, I sat alone on the couch with the TV off, a glass of wine in one hand and my phone in the other, staring again at the photo they'd sent from Thanksgiving. Everyone's so polished. So perfect. All of them dressed in shades of white like they were auditioning for a detergent commercial. And right there in the center, at the table where I once sat between the fireplace and the judgment, was Alan. His name card. His smug smile. His borrowed status. And yet, looking at it now, I didn't feel anger or jealousy. I felt distance. Like the table was 1,000 miles away, and maybe that was the point all along. Maybe not being invited wasn't a punishment. It was freedom. It was clarity. It was the sharp line drawn between who I was and who they would never allow me to become. Still, part of me stared at that chair, my chair, and wondered what it would have felt like to sit down just once and be enough. And yet, part of me still wanted to sit at that damn table.